go ahead and get going. I'll just introduce the meeting, just say this is the Ordinance Committee of the Council. We're meeting on October 12th, 6 to 8 p.m. If you're listening and you want to dial in, there is dial-in information on our website, as well as on the door coming into the building. And we would like to, we have an agenda. I think you guys both have the agenda of things that we want to discuss, and like Justin said, he wants to kind of gear things up again, try to get things rolling again with regard to ordinances, and bringing you up to date and starting a conversation about maybe prioritizing ordinance changes or things related to the ordinances of the city, and just open up the discussion about these three major agenda items. So with that, I'll just let you take off, Justin, and go from there.
Thanks, Larry. And then also, to the council, what I could put was, number 4, obviously, if you guys have anything that's not on here you want to talk about or make a priority, just let me know. We can talk about it, and feel free to jump in. So, code enforcement update. As I kind of discussed earlier in the calendar year, we were starting to line up some hearings for code enforcement violations. So the way our process works is that if the friendly letters, or, not everyone perceives them as friendly, but if the letters that we send and the in-person communication that Jeff engages with alleged violators, if those are unable to foster voluntary compliance at all, or in any meaningful way that gives us confidence that it's going to happen, because obviously everyone has their own circumstances, everyone has their own pace that they're able to accomplish different, ways of staying in compliance. Then we, under the GMC, we can send out a notice of the determination of illegal conditions. These are legal conditions in 8.45 of the GMC. That's our nuisance code. And it's a hearing before the Citizen Review Board, which is kind of like our zoning board. So we had a bunch lined up. We had about 8 or 10 for April, and those did not happen for obvious reasons. We continued it out for a few months, and then we kind of just let it go. And now last month we reserved everybody. There's a very important and strong due process component to this. I want to remind everybody, notice and a hearing, right? Due process. So we have to serve people with notice, but, we have to have a process server, or we send the police. We have to post on the property. These are things we're required to do. I know it feels invasive to these people, but this is to protect their constitutional rights, to notice, to proper notice. So that's why I say it's important. And so we had hearings for 5 different cases. We had them last week. And now these were cases that were originally served back in March for the April meeting, and which we saw really no compliance whatsoever, or things getting worse. And so we had our hearings, and they went pretty well. Jeff and I had really good, cases that we put together. All the evidence was there. And for the most part, all 5 properties in question, they have anywhere from 30 days until April to get into compliance, or else a fine will be levied. One of the 5 properties, they pretty much, once we served them again with the notice of the hearing, they got about, 65-75% in compliance. And that's a common occurrence, and that's good. And sometimes that's what it takes to get people to get in compliance, is to serve them and, get them on the hearing list. So that was a good start. We're hoping to have anywhere, probably no more than 4 hearings per meeting in the future, and the goal is to do them every other month. So until we can get caught up. And then, of course, there'll be cases where there'll be follow-up. Like pretty much all 5 cases we had last week, there's some degree of follow-up that will have to happen. And if there's no compliance from there, then we can pursue the abatement process if we want, depending on what the situation is. So, we're trying to, the main things that get our focus, this is really, Jeff brings the cases and I make sure we're in compliance. But a lot of it's accumulation, rubbish, trash, just random items, broken down, inoperable or unlicensed vehicles and or recreational vehicles that are, not properly parked. That's another kind of thing that gets our priority. Obviously, dangerous conditions, something that might attract a young individual, that's what they call an attractive nuisance, or just something that's just generally unsafe, and that includes properties that no longer have water hookup for whatever reason. There's not many of these, but that was one of them last meeting, and that's going to be another property next meeting. So these are, that's a threat to health and safety of the occupants and potentially the residents nearby. So anyway, that's kind of an overview of where we're at, where we're trying to step up enforcement and be consistent, maintain a consistency of enforcement to communicate to people that we're serious about it, because there's a culture where I think people don't really take our enforcement very seriously. And maybe that's why things sometimes are the way they are. Maybe that's why people don't take as much pride in ownership as we might like. So we're here to work with them. But if we're unable to get voluntary compliance, we know every case is different. We don't have a rigid one-size-fits-all formula to enforcement here. So everyone's got their own situation. We work with them, but sometimes on these hearings, that's part of the process. That's in the code, and so we're trying to pursue that, and also just get used to doing it more, because there's a lot of different aspects of that process that require some fine-tuning from an administrative standpoint, and this is a good opportunity for us to get all our ducks in a row, make sure our process is up to date with the state statutes, things like that. So it has some other good benefits from an administrative standpoint. So anyway, that's kind of an update. Does anyone have any questions about that, what we've been up to, and what our approach is, before I move on?
No questions.
Okay. And if you think of something later on, anyone, even if it's somewhat tangential, just interrupt. Don't worry about it. Okay, so that's our abatement progress. Oh, well, that's an overview. We haven't got to the abatement part. So a couple meetings ago, we asked the council to sign an ordinance, to vote on an ordinance about our abatement. So the very end of this code enforcement process is abatement. If you go to the citizen review board and you're not getting compliance, then you go to the Superior Court of Goldendale County, and you're essentially filing a civil lawsuit, city versus the property owner / occupant. And what you're asking the court for is a warrant of abatement, the ability to go on to the property and fix it yourself, essentially. So we have warrants of abatement, and these things take a very long time to get, again, because of due process. And one of them was this property where there's a number of different recreational vehicles, that people are living there. And there was another property that's abandoned that we wanted to get a proposal for demolition services. So we put the RFP out.
Justin?
And, yeah.
Just to clarify, we actually have those already? Or we're going for the warrant of abatement?
No, we already obtained the warrants.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so got to the point, okay, now we have legal authority the property, let's bid it out to do the work, rather, As far as the demolition, the second property, we didn't really get a bid at all, so we're gonna revisit that. As far as the other property, we are actually going back, our attorney is gonna go back to court and we're gonna get a more specified warrant, because there was a couple conditions on the property that were not included in the court order for the original warrant, and we, for a variety of reasons, we wanted to go back, add the additional detail, and make sure the court order captured these additional conditions, to make sure, we're doing this right. And once we get that, we should be able to move forward. We're also simultaneously, for the first time, we have the landowner stating that he's going to work on it. But we've been going down this road with him for like 4 or 5 years now. So we don't really have very much confidence anything's going to happen, and it's becoming a public health and safety issue. So we're going through the process here. We're updating the warrant, and then we're going to move forward with abating that property. And hopefully that'll be that for now at least. So that's kind of the abatement process, from what we discussed. Hello?
Still here.
Oh, sorry. My phone beeps funny. Okay. So I guess I kind of flipped these actually. That's our progress. I kind of already talked about our strategy overview already. That was subsection B on this. So, okay, we already kind of talked about B and C, I guess. And D to an extent, we want to keep having some upcoming hearings, because we have a lot of matters that need to go there. And so we're just going to keep pursuing that. We've got a lot of properties that need us to go to that next step in the process to kind of show them how serious we are. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to happen, unfortunately. I hate to say. And hopefully, just kind of sticking within that administrative or quasi-judicial process of the Citizen Review Board, hopefully that we'll be able to work in that, and that we don't have to go to court. Because then it's going to be a question of, going to court is expensive. We can't go to court for all of these properties, and then you kind of have to make this cost-benefit analysis. Well, what property is worth it here to go and litigate in court and get a warrant of evasion? We're not really at that point yet, but I just kind of wanted to let you know that's an important economic consideration that we have to take into account. If we're going to prioritize code enforcement, of course, then you have to kind of put that in perspective. Well, is it worth the cost to accomplish this? Or is it worth, even if accomplishing it takes a long time, is it worth the cost to communicate to our constituents that, we're serious about this? So there's a certain goodwill value there. It's kind of intangible maybe. But I guess I just kind of want to put that out there. But we don't have any specific decisions on that to make at the moment. I guess that's kind of like where we're at with code enforcement. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about any of that stuff?
No, I think we're good here.
Okay, all right, good. Comprehensive planning. The last comprehensive plan was 2014. Please, I've been reading through it. Yeah, that's right. Blair, does that sound right?
2014.
Yeah. So comprehensive planning is, inevitably, as the land use planning, you start thinking about, okay, how's our code look? Is it up to date? And there are things that could be more up to date. And, inevitably our code is it's a web, and different provisions and different sections interrelate and impact each other. And so when you start thinking about comprehensive planning, it's this very holistic view of our body of law that we have here and how it's accomplishing the goals we want to accomplish. Growth of the city, or economic development, or, accommodating for different industries or changes in demographics, services that people might want, public or private. You gotta kind of think about all this stuff. Just like we did our broadband study last year, and we're thinking about broadband and how that plays into all those things, economic development, our school system, stuff like that. There's infrastructure, and then you gotta look, is our code allowing for, from a planning standpoint, is it making it easy or hard for, let's say, private developers, utility companies to come in and provide internet to people, right? Just basic stuff like that. So comprehensive planning is kind of looking at problems like, in this instance, broadband, let's say, and then kind of following to its logical end and seeing how our code might be helping or hurting or being neutral on that sort of topic. So I guess I would say to the ordinance committee, I'll send you the 14 comprehensive plan. You can kind of see what people at the time were thinking about. But if we want to think about how we want our community to grow and improve, or be whatever it is that you would like it to be that it's not, or to maintain the things that you do love about it, we want to think about how we can accomplish that with our ordinances, So, kind of a segue from that, I moved here 4 years ago at the end of September, so it's been 4 years and a couple weeks. And from the very beginning, being involved in the chamber, initially started talking and thinking a lot about economic development. And as things progressed with my business and being a public official and now working on the administrative side, including doing code enforcement with Jeff and Larry and Mike, I have come personally and professionally to this conclusion that I think economic development in our community has to be based, at this point, on code enforcement. And the reason I say that is because when we talk about economic development in like the purest sense, you're talking about investing in a place, in a project, right? Whether it's a business or some other enterprise. And to an extent, you're investing in a community. And I think that if we want current residents and people that are not residents that might invest in the community, or people that are not residents that might relocate here and invest in the community, we need to think about what is that investment, right? And I think that from talking with a lot of people, those investments might not always be happening because of a lack of code enforcement and, the city looking a certain way. People might drive into town and say, hey, this place is really great, and they'll turn a corner and they start seeing things that they don't like to see, and they start seeing a place that they don't want to invest in, whether that's emotionally, personally, or financially. So for me, and obviously my perspective is very much colored by the particular work that I'm doing right now in the city, but I believe that our economic development strategy needs to be based on a strong and consistent and effective code enforcement policy. And I think our laws are fine the way they are. I'm not even proposing that we need to adjust any aspect of our nuisance code. It's just, I guess, having the blessing of the council, and hopefully we can build up some support and trust within the community. I mean, because I think people are skeptical about our ability to be effective in code enforcement. But we want to be effective, and we want people to know that. And I think it'll change people's mentalities, about our community in a very positive way. So, I guess the point of this part is like me telling you where I'm at and kind of seeing how you feel about that, I suppose. If anyone has any concerns or they think that makes sense, that's fine too.
Well, Justin, this is Mylan. A while back, we were talking about the housing maybe how we could change the housing code. I don't know, Larry, did you ever talk about that?
Yeah, that was gonna be my next thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I guess that's fine, I mean, that's kind of a natural progression, we do need to talk about housing. But keep going, Marlon, I mean.
Well, again, how can we help out, if there is a potential housing development, how could the city help out? Maybe we need to change our housing code, or building code, I should say, and, yeah, otherwise we need to talk about it.
Yep, and I will talk about that, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anyway, so that is kind of the, like I said, your code enforcement-based economic development strategy. That's what it is. It's creating the conditions that would hope, that are going to facilitate more investment in the community. And that's a good segue to talking about housing. Now, I've been researching long about housing development. When you talk about housing, governmental, public incentives for housing development, what you're talking about is shifting the cost of development from the private sector to the public sector. Typical examples of incentives might include things like waiving a permit fee, expediting permitting, reducing design standards. Maybe the code says if you're going to make a subdivision, you have to have sidewalks, and you have to have curbs look a certain way and be a certain size, and you have to have lights every X amount of feet. So one thing that can happen is you can create incentives where you basically tell developers you can get a variance from those requirements. Because from a developmental standpoint, those things are expensive upfront costs that a developer has to incur, right? They're doing all this infrastructure, and then they still have to sell all the land, and that's just the way it is. But like I said, you're shifting the cost away. The street light distances, the sidewalks, the curbs, they all exist for a reason. Going back to comprehensive planning, because the community and stakeholders through a public process decided this is what we want for our community. We want to make sure that it's walkable, so there has to be sidewalks. We want to make sure there's enough street lights for whatever reason, keep it illuminated at night, things like that. We've decided that. So in that sense, if you're creating a variance, you're kind of deviating from those standards that were kind of developed in a public forum. And that can create issues. And then the other thing, of course, is like reducing costs, right? Whether it's permitting or reducing the upfront cost it might be to install a water meter, right? There's a cost associated with all those things, right? So someone's got to pay for it. And do you want the public, the city, to be bearing those costs? And it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all approach. So it could go through a public process where people decide, in this circumstance, we want this particular type of housing development to happen, so we're willing to deviate from the municipal code standards. So that's one thing you can do, to incentivize development. But that for me is really like incentivizing a subdivision. And there's a couple places in town where that can happen, and it's limited. The other housing development we might think about would be the incentive for someone to buy a vacant lot, there's a few of them in town, or buy a house that's, seen better days and demolish it and build a new one. There's not too much we can do really to incentivize that. We don't have a long wait time to get your permit. We have pretty good customer service. Our permitting fees aren't that expensive. In most cases, there's already a water hookup there. So in those circumstances, the best that I can say as a way to incentivize, kind of going back to my initial point, is through code enforcement. You got to make it seem like up that curb appeal, right? They're going to say, this vacant lot, this is great. You're surrounded by nice looking houses, looks like a nice neighborhood, people take care of their yards, you know, there's not a bunch of junk everywhere. You know, consider the flip side where someone looks at a vacant lot in town and they say, well, that, you know, surrounded by a bunch of dilapidated, beat up houses where people don't seem to care and there's junk everywhere and trash, you know, that's gonna change someone's perspective about whether they want to invest in that, you know? And kind of the third thing then, as far as incentivizing development, would be this would require a code change potentially, which is trying to promote higher density in our central business district. You know, right now, if you wanted to have a building on Main Street, if you wanted to go in there and buy one of those empty lots or buy a building and convert it to have apartments on the second floor, if you wanted to build an entirely new structure and have a residence, it's a conditional use. It's not permitted. So you have to go through a public process. And obviously parking is a concern, and that's not really what I want to get at the moment, but I think that from an economic development standpoint, if you want to have a stronger retail economy on Main Street, having more density there is going to help that. You know, that's foot traffic. It's people walking by these businesses, you know, and those crowds, you know, typically, forget the last like 8 months, typically those crowds are going to attract more people, right? And, you know, you think about most downtown areas, and that's how they're set up. It's mixed use. You have commercial retail on the first floor, you have residential on the second floor. And if from an investment standpoint, if you've got to borrow money to build a building like this, the more ways you could have a rental revenue stream, the better to help, you know, pay for the money you got to borrow to make this project even happen. So I think that's one way we can also think about incentivizing housing is, you know, making it a bit easier to make residential units in the central business district. And, you know, obviously we're probably going to be more apartments, but I know that there's a shortage of rentals in the area. You know, and then I think that will kind of create some relief, and then as we look at kind of the more lower density areas from a zoning standpoint, we can kind of preserve some of those lower densities more on the periphery of the city, while potentially driving residency closer inward into a city center. You know, that's a pretty common strategy that a lot of cities have employed to promote housing.
Justin,
So, yeah.
question on the higher density, like you're saying for like downtown, for example.
Yeah.
What would be the difficulty? So one thing that I would be concerned is changing that now and not having new buildings, but having the existing buildings being converted into housing. From a safety standpoint.
That's not the goal here, obviously.
Okay,
right?
yeah, from the safety standpoint, I understand some of the stories are that if one of those buildings catches fire, the trusses go across the entire downtown basically, connecting one business to the other. So for example, a fire would spread through the wall into another building, and that's how we ended up with those empty spots in between buildings. So,
right.
Would that be possible to do that and list it as new buildings, but managing the existing buildings so that if that is done, safety is accounted for and taken care of before they're converted into housing?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the ideal situation, of course, is someone demolishes these old buildings that are crumbling and puts something new up, right? You know, that meets today's standards and is going to withstand the potential of fire, right? That's not, of course, always going to be the case.
Yeah, there's that or earthquakes.
Well, another thing, Justin, I've been told, you know, a lot of these empty lots or even buildings downtown owned by someone else that doesn't even live in Goldendale. And so that's,
Sure.
what would be the incentive
what it says.
Okay,
Just making a note here. If we were to write the code to make it easier to put a residency there, and heck, we could still have it go be a conditional use, run through the zoning board. I mean, add time to the process. But if it was an existing building, it's going to have a rigorous standard that it's going to have to meet to achieve occupancy. So I think that would probably exclude a lot of the buildings. And we can go back and make sure that our code is structured in a way that, if someone's applying for conditional use to convert one of these buildings, like the first floor, let's say, right, that's not what we want. But let's say they're trying to take a storefront and turn it into an apartment, that, a lot of weight is going to be given to Jeff's assessment of that building's potential inability to accommodate that kind of occupancy, let's say. Or we could be specific that say, like, you can't convert the existing building, on the first floor, and if it's on the second floor, you got to meet all these, requirements. So we can be very explicit in what those requirements are. That would naturally lend itself towards incentivizing a new building existing. So that's an option available for us. As far as the out-of-town owners go, there's not much we can do other than trying to make it an attractive investment for them to actually put money into the thing for once.
right.
People just sit on the property. I guess I can only assume they're speculating in a very kind of patient sense. And they're speculating that the value is going to go up at some point. And if we can create some sort of incentive, even if it's just like, hey, if you rebuild this, you can put apartments and you can get a bunch of rental income and make some money off this rather than just letting it crumble into the earth. And that's a start, right?
Sure.
And of course, we can create more incentives, but the thing I was explaining was, then you're shifting the cost back on the public, and I don't really know that that's the most fiscally responsible thing for us to do at this point. But we can certainly explore that more about how to balance that risk. So anyway, that was kind of the three different things about housing. And we can talk more about density if you want. It's going to be important. If we're going to have people moving here, we don't want to just lose to the county. There's so many people that move here, that move to Goldendale, but they're out 10 miles outside of town or whatever. The story, it's always the same story I hear. We want to make it more attractive here. And a lot of people move to Goldendale, right? Like I've met a few people in the last few months that are living in the city while they build their house outside of town. But maybe you make it so people move here and they decide to stay in the city. We need more people here. It's going to help our retail economy. It's going to help the city. We're going to get more, water and sewer customers. All these things. So this is not. We don't need to come up with a decision right now. This is just kind of like, I think this is good. These are the things that we need to be thinking about from when we're talking about comprehensive planning with regard to housing development. Yeah. And that's what I mean on the agenda, incentivizing these new projects.
Justin,
Yeah.
question for you. What do you think, I'm trying to see how to word this in a way that makes sense.
Sure.
But I think there's some growing pains that we kind of have to go through before we see growth, and let me know if you agree and what you think about this. For example, going through the abatement process and all the steps, like you said, it hasn't been pushed before. It's kind of been, here and there and not gone through the whole process before, and you guys are taking care of that. And there's gonna be some growing pains where people are gonna be unhappy with the fact that now they have to abide by basically by the rules that have always been there, just haven't been enforced.
Right.
But one of the things, I think you were still on council, when we started enforcing the trailers, unhitched trailers on the road. And, you know, we put Goldendale PD in a predicament because they went and started enforcing that at the council's request and, you know, promised that we're gonna back them. And the moment that they started enforcing it, we had a few citizens upset because they went and got this big trailer and never planned to park it anywhere on their property. They planned to park it on the street all along, which blocks their beautiful home from view. And it's that kind of thing that would bring property value down when you know, and we had discussion here, and then we pretty much took a step back, asked the PD to take a step back, even though one or two councils before, we had said, go get it done.
Yeah.
And so my concern is, can you talk to us to the growing pains that we're gonna see? Because it sounds right, and in the long run, to go through the process, start basically putting our foot down and enforcing these laws. But we're gonna see a lot of heat for it. We're gonna see unhappy citizens coming to council. You know, but it's not like the laws were new. They've been there the whole time, and in fact, like you guys said, you've been having discussions with them for over 5-10 years, trying to get them to comply. So it's not new to them.
Yeah. You know, we don't, you know, the cops putting, you know, tagging on his trailers, you know, I remember that, you know, and that's tough because you say, just tag all on his trailers. It's just very one size fits all, right?
Right.
And sometimes you gotta do that, right? We do that, you know, go ticket all the cars that are violating some parking law at the moment. But, you know, as far as these code enforcement cases go, I mean, there's a personal touch to it. You know, we're not just walking up to a property, seeing some overgrown grass, and then hauling them into a citizen review board meeting. You know, there's a number of communications that go on.
Right.
You know, and, you know, if decisions of the citizen review board are appealed, the council is the appeals board. So we might have an issue if somebody tries to bring a code enforcement issue to the council at a council meeting. But we can kind of, we can talk about that. That's not really an issue at the moment, but that would be a problem from a procedural standpoint. So, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things about our city council is the ability to, you know, kind of be nonpartisan and avoid controversy as much as possible. It makes your job a lot easier.
Right.
I know.
Well,
You know, and this is the potential to kind of throw that for a tailspin.
Well,
You get people, you know, yeah, sorry.
no, but one thing I just don't want us to do, and maybe, you know, as we move forward, I want us to have a long drawn-out discussion enough that whatever decision was made with all the information that you guys could provide us, so that we're not going wishy-washy every time somebody questions it, you know?
Exactly, and that's where comprehensive planning plays an important role once again, is that we get to the part of comprehensive planning where we talk about code enforcement, and we invite through a public participation process, like meetings like this, we invite people from the public to participate so that we can get feedback during that planning process. and we can incorporate those comments into an enforcement strategy. You know, what I'm talking about proposing, this is just, hey, this is what I think would be a good way to do it. But at the end of the day, that needs to be informed and guided by the council and by the public. Because, you know, the council represents the constituency of our city, and we need to make sure that, you know, if the council is directing the administration to carry out a certain enforcement strategy, we want to make sure that all these things are consistent. You know, that the council is following, you know, to the best of our abilities, what we think is what the public wants. And the only way we can discern that is through a public participation process. And Facebook does not count as a public participation process. So, you know, but then that's a bummer at the same time, you know, because a lot of people that are going to be keyboard warriors aren't going to show up to a meeting for whatever reason.
Right.
But they might have a really good point. You know, it might be a fringe point, it might be more extreme.
Right.
But, you know, so, you know, these are things we need to be aware of when we're developing the strategy. So that kind of coming full circle, Phil, is like, so when people corner you, right? When they corner the council member and they give you a hard time about this, you're like, this is, you know, like, you had a chance, you still have a chance, but like, this is a public thing, you know?
Right.
We talked about this. You know, you want to be able to say that. We talked about this.
You don't mean not to point them in Larry's direction anymore? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm hoping Larry will be the fall guy for a little bit longer. I mean, that was the other thing I was going to say, is you can just blame Larry if, you know, you're in that situation.
Right.
But in all seriousness, I mean, you know, if it's a public enough process, it's like the scenario when you're watching the Facebook thread, and someone says something outlandish, and then all these people kind of come to the defense of the position that, you know, the other position.
Right.
And then like, hey man, yeah, remember, we had a meeting, we talked about this, we all agreed, we all need to step it up, you know.
Well,
And listen, if it's like, if we feel like there's some aspect of the process that, you know, like Jeff and I are doing that we want to be different, not all that has to be changed through an ordinance. You know, there's certain aspects that can be changed administratively. So, you know, that's an option too.
right. Well, you know, same thing with like GPD. We don't want to get you and Jeff caught in the middle and then, you know, going back and forth, and then you guys are the bad guys. So I think it's the perfect time to look at the comprehensive plan to give everybody, you know, like you said, open it up for meetings, discussion, and we keep moving forward. It's a good plan.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Sorry, all right. So, okay. Well, that would definitely be an important agenda item as we start talking about comprehensive plan. So we can, this is not the last time we'll be talking about this, for sure. Looking at the agenda here, I kind of touched on all of A, B, and C in number 2, which was comprehensive plan. All right, so number 3, basically ordinance updates, things that have come up since January when I started doing this that we've been kind of tossing around, could use or revisit. A couple of these things are more recent. Okay, the first thing's food trucks. You know, we've had a few food trucks come and go in the last 2 years. We don't really have anything on the books about it. There's some jurisdictions that are super strict and serious about it, like you might expect, like if you were to look up Seattle or Vancouver. It's a little much, but it's a good learning tool to see one way to do these things. And when it, you know, it's basically just like what do we want to have standards? You know, if you're going to operate a food truck in the city, you know, if you're going to park somewhere permanently, if you're going to move around, or if you're going to come for the day, you know, for a special event, there probably needs to be different regulations, different standards. There probably needs to be certain standards that are continuous between the different, you know, activities. We don't have any of this stuff. So, you know, that's something we can do if the council wants. I mean, there's a kind of public health and safety angle here. That's kind of why. You know, it's a growing business model. I think we're going to see more of it. It's not going away. You know, as a business owner, your access to equipment and being able to run your business, your ability to enter into that business is easier. So I think we're going to see more of it, and I think we want to encourage it. I mean, you know, in a safe way. But you know, you're dealing with people, feeding people, cooking food. We want to make sure they're following the right standards. We want to make sure that it's fitting in. Once again, our comprehensive plan. Like, we don't want someone parking a food truck in a place they shouldn't be, right? Like, disturbing a bunch of neighborhood people, right? You know, the basic stuff. So, you know, if you want me to kind of work on something and you have specifics you want me addressed, I can work on that. Or if you don't think it's an issue, we can forget about it or revisit it if there's a problem in the future.
Well, right now, Justin, do the food trucks have to have a health inspection or a certificate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, they have to be licensed with the county. Yep. That's pretty much the only thing they're going to do right now.
And
I mean, from a local ordinance standpoint.
Right.
so I would
They have
say,
to get licensed, they have to be licensed to state as a business. They have to be usually licensed through L&I, depending on the type of equipment in there. You know, there's a hood.
Mm-hmm.
so we probably need something that talks about occupying and, you know, being inside, being safe, and what is kind of safe to be in.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where I want to go with this, but, you know, some kind of standard where it's, don't bring your homemade trailer that's kind of, you know, barely holding to the wind and put some people in there versus something that's more sturdy and properly built.
Sure.
I mean,
That's more of an L&I thing, but I mean, we could definitely explore that to make sure, there's certain standards. I'll look at some other ordinances and see how they address that, and can come back with that.
Hey Justin, this is Lauren. Yeah, I'd be curious to know what the county regulates in terms of the food carts and if there's any issues or liabilities that the city might face. Maybe be looking at some other small cities that have addressed this. Definitely don't want to be growing government just to grow government, but if there's some liability or safety issues, we should probably address that. But I think also just making sure we don't have any restrictions that discourage that kind of engagement, because it definitely can be a good entry for a small business. It may start as a food truck and eventually become a restaurant. So we want to try and encourage any sort of small economic opportunities, especially at this time.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I'll look at what the county has. I'm not sure they do have anything, but, the kind of thing that kind of strikes Jeff and myself as an issue is, what if a food truck wants to just start parking on the street somewhere or in a parking lot, are we going to make them go through a site plan process? Site plans apply to all new non-residential development. That's like a 3-month process right there. And what started as hey, can I just pull my truck up real quick and start selling burgers or whatever the case becomes now a planning department process. But you want to make sure, I suppose, you want to make sure what they're doing is not inhibiting traffic or, occurring in a zoning area that doesn't allow for businesses as a principal or commercial or conditional use. So there's like a zoning issue. Stuff like that, we want to make sure, and if they are providing parking, are they meeting our parking standards in our code? If they put up a sign, is it meeting our sign, do we want to create rules that require them to kind of go through the planning process?
I think on that, Justin, if we can make it to where it's just open and inviting, I think, to say, if you want to put up a food truck for a day or two, over the weekend, make sure you follow basic rules, like we have a lighting ordinance, so don't light up the whole town. You know, meet the parking guidelines so that if, let's say, one of the gas stations wants to do an event and bring a whole bunch of food trucks. Go for it. 1 or 2 days, they're set up for the weekend, and then it's limited.
Yeah.
But if they're,
That's what I'd like to see, you know.
Yeah.
If you're coming for a day or a few days, make it very easy, you know. But I guess one of the concerns is like, okay, so typically food trucks are exempt from a lot of requirements because they're temporary. And because the second you are a stationary structure, like a building, all these other requirements kick in, like ADA access, for example, or things related to your utility. We have food trucks in town that are pretty, they don't move around very much. But they're, you know, if we're not holding them to those higher standards, maybe there's a balance there that needs to be struck. You know what I mean? Because, you know, like the access issue is important. I mean, if someone just pulls up in a gravel parking lot and it's on a slope or something, you know, something weird, it's just whatever the topography might be, you know, like we've had an access issue that normally, if they were any other type of business, would be addressed through other regulations. You know what I mean?
right. Well, I think we can achieve all those very simple. We don't have to say you have to have a concrete sidewalk and, you know, to have full access, but leveling might be fairly easy for the most part if you're going to be permanent, and maybe something to say if you're going to be more than a weekend, or if you plan on hosting food trucks, you should probably get some adequate power system other than extension cords.
Yeah.
You should probably, you know, look at having access and proper parking. I don't know, whatever you guys can figure out, that it's still easy, and we're not gonna change the whole world on the existing food trucks either that we have.
And that's what I like too.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say,
cities that do, you know, if you're here for a part-time, short period of time, if you're moving around, you just have to write that, you know, fill out a form that tells the city what your plan is. Of course, none of us work weekends anyway, right? So,
Right.
That's always the other way around it.
well, that's what I like, Justin. They have to go by the code, but still, it's easy for them to get the permit and get started.
Sure. Okay. I'll take a look at some stuff, and we'll have a follow-up, and we present some different options. You know, and the other thing for me is, too, I'm not trying to make my job more difficult, right?
Right.
You know, you start adding all these regulations, that's, you know, more government, that's more, you know, more things to be on top of and keep track. They're like, oh, was this food truck didn't eat by 2 o'clock on Saturday? You know, that's ridiculous.
Right. Well,
You know, we're not doing that.
I think we need to do an incentive. If they're open on Mondays and it's a food truck, any business open on Monday needs to have an incentive here. We need some food places
Yeah, right.
on Mondays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. Well, I'll work on some stuff, and we can present. We can follow up in a. Where are we at? I guess we'll follow up in December. We'll have a follow up. Anyway, I'll work on some food truck stuff then. Okay. The next thing is about fences. This kind of came up in a number of different ways. One of them was that in our nuisance ordinance, there's language that basically says if you have certain types of violations, for example, we have a rule that says if you have a wrecked or inoperable vehicle, it's not allowed to be outside of your designated driveway area. You know, so a broken down RV in the middle of the yard, not okay. That's a violation. But if you have a site obscuring fence, obscuring people's sight from this unlawful activity, and that's one way that you can deal with it. I don't love that. I don't, you know, as a way to say, hey, selectively, or you can just build a fence and cover it up. But for some people, that's proven to be a preferred method of dealing with these things. Now, whether or not I wasn't really thinking about changing the code. I mean, if you guys don't think that that's the best option for us to give to people, we can talk about that. But our main concern was, what do these fences need to look like? Because there's no standard in our code. Obviously, we want fences need to be structurally sound. They can't be dangerous. But do we want to create some sort of standard about size of the fence, materials of fence? This is a pretty common thing in a lot of municipal codes. And then, of course, this comes up just from a building permit standpoint. People go up to Jeff and say, I want to build a fence. What's the code on it? We don't really have it. So it's a kind of multifaceted angle here, just thinking about fences. How do we want them to function? How do we want them to look? You know? Some people will say, it can be made out of wood, galvanized steel with wire, chain link, but, cinder block, no. Right? But stuff like that, Again, I'm not asking for you to give me, necessarily like your answer, but if that's something you want me to explore a bit more, we can come up with some different options. We have some general ideas. I can incorporate that into our research.
Well, wouldn't this, I think, I don't know how everybody thinks, but I personally think we do need to have some standards, maybe as far as height. It definitely defeats the purpose to have, a compound built in the city limits in the middle of, every other block is completely blocked in with 10-foot fences. I mean, we're trying to make the city pretty, in a sense, but then we have everybody building 8-foot walls, defeats the whole point.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, I agree. We want it to look nice at the end of the day, but we also don't want it to be overly burdensome. We don't want it to be, hey, it's good with the fence, it's got to be out of a super expensive, labor-intensive material or something.
Well,
we don't want to do that, of course.
I think everybody thinks of the perfect home having a white picket fence, right? So.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think a cost also has to play with it too. I mean, some fences are very costly, and perhaps, I don't know how we would set that up or not.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously we're not making anyone make a fence, but if people are going to do it, we of course, we had a situation where someone started building a fence, and it was not going to work. It was not, they thought it was a fence. It was not a fence. So they had done a bunch of work and it felt bad, but you can't meet this way. This is dangerous. This is going to fall over. Ugly. I mean, we didn't lead with that, but it was a threat to public safety. And it was a bummer because maybe had they known they couldn't do that, they wouldn't have wasted all the time and whatever money they spent on it. So I think just having the code be clear would be helpful, especially if we're going to say, hey, from a code enforcement standpoint, you gotta move that RV or you gotta put a site obscuring fence up. If you're gonna do that fence, here are the standards for that.
Right.
And at that point, you could you could have a different set of standards for the site obscuring fence, and maybe make that barrier to entry even higher. Like, hey, you can do this fence to cover up your nuisance, but you gotta do it real fancy or whatever. We don't create an economic disincentive to pursuing that and get them to actually clean up the conditions. That's another option. A lot of different options here.
I think we should be pretty cautious about where we go with that. We don't want to just expand government and regulations to try and, dictate exactly where everyone needs to go with their fencing standards. Obviously, there's a public safety issue, that's a separate item, but I guess for myself, I look at it and I see 30 to 40% increase in property values over the last couple of years. I see a lot of new people coming into town, and I kind of wonder, yeah, things could be prettier, but we're still attracting a lot of folks that are moving to Goldendale and Clickitat County, and so I just think that if folks really want to nail down on exactly what their fence looks like, they should move to like something with a homeowners association that defines that real strictly, that that's not really the city's role, that's an overstep of government on private property. And I guess in that respect, if we want to incentivize development, rather than thinking that ordinances and code enforcement is going to do that, sure it may help, but we're not going to hammer down on one residence on one block. It's going to make it look better, and the next thing you know, someone's going to build a brand new $400,000 home there. And I think that we need to look at potentially some subdivisions that accommodate the type of folks that have the economic and career mobility to actually relocate to Goldendale. And that's really, you're looking at a different neighborhood altogether. And so kind of stepping back in the conversation a little bit, just as we talk about fences and ordinances and code requirements, I think maybe we should at some point revisit what economic development incentives really mean and look at it on a broader scale of new neighborhoods and incentivizing developers to create those new neighborhoods that attract the people that have the ability to relocate.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so for the fence, I mean, yeah, we can totally just focus on public health and safety, standards that say, have to be structurally sound. Obviously, we want that. We don't have to legislate aesthetics. We don't want to. That's totally fine.
Yeah, we're a rural community with horses in town, and that's one of the things that attracts people as they walk through the community. No sidewalks, gravel on the side of the road, but by gosh, they can stop and feed or pet or look at a horse, and they're contained with field fence or electric wire. And I mean, that's definitely one of the things that attracted my family to the community. So we don't want to regulate ourselves out of what is drawing people to us.
Sure.
So,
Okay, good point.
Justin, would this also talk about like retaining walls and such?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, because on that aspect of, from a previous place where I lived and the lack of standards there, that created nightmares in a new subdivision where the retaining walls were not up to standard and ended up falling over. So, as we talk about new developments and housing developments, I think it would be a really good idea to have that down when you start talking about retaining walls, especially between homes and properties, and having that down so that builders know what they're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. Let me double check what the building code that we've adopted says. I might have addressed it already, but yeah, if it's not addressed in a way that we think is going to promote public safety, then it definitely includes some language like that in whatever we come up with about the fences. Yeah. All right, good.
There should be some pretty good guidance from MRSC or American Society for Civil Engineers on retaining walls, and above a certain height definitely should be reviewed and permitted for public safety.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, it's like, I know for most, typically the standard is if a fence is 6 feet or under, doesn't need to be permitted, but if it's over, it does. I think that's in the building code. I just think there's no other details about, if you're making a 6 foot or less fence, can it be made out of a warehouse pallet? Or, you know what I mean? Is that sufficient? Does it need to be certain material? And obviously the material will impact the structural integrity and thus the impact on public safety. So we'll just focus on that angle as we come up with some proposals for you guys. That sounds good. So what we'll do is it'll be a kind of, an option. These different types of fences are more dangerous or represented. We can look at how other jurisdictions, similar communities to us, have dealt with it. And if we found that nobody has, that could be a finding as well. So, that would be informative. All right. Okay, and then I don't want to forget, more we're talking about subdivisions. Yeah, that kind of came up, you know, about the whole incentivizing housing development. That's definitely something that we need to think about. Is our subdivision code where we want it to be, or if and when people come and want to develop those properties, you know what I mean? So we can, that's something we can revisit at the next meeting, from a comprehensive planning standpoint, and look at our subdivision code and to present a breakdown and kind of present some pros and cons, if that would be helpful. I kind of would, what do you guys want to see in regard to that, you know what I mean? You want to see how other places have done it, or,
What I've seen in other communities is like a waiver of certain fees, or maybe a postponement of certain monthly fees on things like water and sewer connections. So maybe a developer can come in and say, they have a proposal for 50 homes in this area, and the city says, well, that's great, we really need the housing. It's a little bit cost prohibitive, so we're going to waive the water connection fees for the developer portion of them. And the other portion of that would be waiving or delaying the monthly service connection fee. So maybe that service connection fee would just not be collected until it was actually a home occupancy that occurred. So that the actual fee would be charged the speculative, not speculative buyer, the final buyer, and they would take on that fee, but the speculative builder would not have to pay that monthly fee.
okay, yeah. All right, yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit before, and I think the best thing for me to do for you guys is to kind of, I'll talk about that, we'll have a follow-up. Some of us have to run through some legal analysis about the city's ability or inability to give away public funds, essentially. Like some of what you're talking about is kind of borderline talks about that, and we want to make sure that we do it right. So I'll have a breakdown of the way that we can and can't do it, and to the best of my ability, kind of economic breakdown. Because I think the things you're talking about are great ideas, but the thing that concerns me is like you're shifting that cost back onto the public, right? And how do we want to handle that situation? Obviously, we want it to be a case-by-case basis, right? Not just, oh, anyone can come in and this is the way it works. We probably want to make sure the developer is legit and has a plan and this, that, and the other thing. And so what's the process going to be for us to assess that, right? We want to make sure that we have control over that. So if we are waiving or deferring fees, we're going into it and we're not assuming as much risk, you know what I mean? That's just my concern, is it's like this risk analysis, right? We want to make sure it's, yeah. Okay, so
you want to see that income eventually come back, and I don't know if it's there's a possibility to do that through, any new home that's built in a fully new subdivision. It's going to be obviously most likely a higher property value than a lot of homes in Goldendale, so maybe you see that income come back over the next 3 to 4 years. Or maybe there's a potential to have a tiered monthly charge that increases the rate for new homes for a period of 3, 4, 5 years to help recoup that cost that wasn't borne by the developer. But as a way to incentivize housing so that there is available housing to help people come in and establish here and take job opportunities that are there. So we have a variety of ways to look at that. And I'm just spitballing here, Justin, on some different ideas, but it's worth looking into, I think.
That's great. I've just been spitballing all night, so. No,
that's good.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll get this going. We'll get some breakdown. I mean, really, I'm bringing these things up just to kind of say, hey guys, this is what we've been thinking. Do you want me to spend more time and energy looking into this for, actually get a draft proposal ordinance? So I'm glad we're talking about this. Glad everyone's on board. We're all kind of synchronizing here a bit. Okay, really the last thing came up for like a bit of a pending zoning issue that I really want to get into. But basically what came up was that as an agricultural activity. Putting aside any sort of zoning law that says you can or cannot do ag in certain zoning areas, for example, it might say you cannot do agricultural activity on a commercial scale in a residential area. And if you were to do that in a residential area, there's a zoning issue. But beyond that, our zoning code, as many of you know, Nancy's supposed to turn off the camera when we start this conversation, by the way. So she doesn't. I'm kidding. This is obviously kind of a controversial issue. Our zoning code, we have a moratorium on what they refer to as marijuana-based businesses. I think it's meant to be a catch-all, but in thinking about hemp-based agricultural activity, me and I our city attorney kind of agreed that our zoning code is not exactly very clear about that. I think the intent of the zoning code was that we didn't want more pot shops, right? More retail. I guess that also seemed to have included like manufacturing businesses, businesses that process cannabis-derived compounds and make new things like oils or whatever, candy, stuff like that. But then you have hemp agriculture. And hemp is used in all kinds of industrial things like rope, solvents, soap, different things like that. It's not the plant that you smoked and used and so anyway, I guess what I was getting at was you guys want to look at our code and try to revise it to provide, you want to allow hemp-based agriculture activities. We're an ag community. We have agricultural background and history. I don't really know where hemp is economically. I know that I'm seeing it pop up a lot more. I think there's economic opportunity there. Obviously, we have our moratorium. We want to balance the interests, that led to that becoming our law. Is this ag thing something we want to allow for? As long as it's zoned and licensed properly.
Well,
So this is Lauren, this really caught my attention, Justin, because partially because I work with the Conservation District and the Conservation Commission and Office of Farmland Preservation. There's a big push for urban agriculture, and there has been for over a decade. We really haven't seen a lot of opportunities for it here locally, so it's not something that I've worked with in my job locally, but across the state we see a lot of large municipalities that go out of their way to help encourage and support urban agriculture. And I think right now especially it's probably at a peak because of one, COVID and the desire for locally sourced foods, the potential for the challenges of COVID reducing the availability of fresh foods, and then additionally the economic opportunities. And similar to the food trucks, just trying to incentivize that urban small-scale operation that may improve the economy, but also using that as a gateway to larger-scale farming in a community that was founded on farming. They used to grow alfalfa in the front of the high school there and harvest every year until about 10, 15 years ago. So I think that this is a great conversation or an opportunity for the city to encourage urban agriculture. Obviously, the hemp issue introduces some other morality concerns, although from my initial quick reading, there's quite a difference between hemp and marijuana. And if we want to start regulating it against spices, then we're opening the door to all kinds of things in terms of hemp, beer, alcohol, bars, distilleries, etc. And I don't know that we want to go down that road. But I think that it'd be great to take a look at some opportunities to encourage urban agriculture. And I've even kind of started drafting some potential ordinance language to address that, because I think especially in our community at this time, we should encourage anybody to start working towards developing economic opportunities and, whether it's hemp or tomatoes or whatever the case may be, finding ways to help support the local food source and our economy.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had this conversation a lot about, kind of creating a regulatory environment that's going to make it easier for the smaller scale cottage industries, I think it's definitely going to help. A lot of people in town, they do all kinds of different things people don't have just one hand in one pot, you know, they're working on different projects all the time. I think it'd be great to be able to encourage urban agriculture, you know, and you know, that's gonna support if someone wants to have a value-added product and go to market with it and help grow our, you know, this is economic development we're talking about, right? You know, they can open a storefront or sell goods to someone locally that will sell it, go to the farmer's market, so.
Sure, we want to make sure that it doesn't infringe on the neighborhood in terms of traffic or operations, that sort of thing. So,
Sure, yeah,
I mean, there's some reasonable limitations there, but we should definitely be encouraging that sort of activity.
okay, good.
But I guess with respect to urban agriculture, I mean, hemp kind of throws up red flags for some folks, and so maybe some education or some more discussion about what that's like in other areas would be helpful as well.
I mean, you know, when you talk about regulating morality, you know, this zoning moratorium on marijuana, it kind of came about right when they decriminalized that plant, what it is. You know, when they did that, however many years ago that was the very beginning, and I don't, you know, I don't know whether people's perceptions have changed over the course of the period of time since then. And, you know, I think this is purely a suggestion, but, you know, if we're potentially revisiting this ordinance to provide clarity, I mean, is that something you want to revisit in any other way, shape, or form? You know, I'm not saying we need more retail locations. I can make an argument for and against that, you know, that's my job. But,
Well,
you know,
and I think
I just want to say in terms of, there's also that middle area, like manufacturing, right? You think about like growing manufacturing industries in the state, and these processing facilities are very high tech. They're, you know, facilities, and that's a potential economic development driver that we might be foreclosing ourselves from. And if that's something you want to explore in like a cautious, responsible way, you know, that has public oversight, a public participation process, we can do that. But if you guys don't want to touch this right now and get mad at me for bringing it up, I'm totally cool with that.
Justin,
I guess my preference, but first of all, my preference would be let the free market regulate that. I just like we don't need 14 gas stations, we don't need however many pot sales. But I think it's really important to make the distinguishment between hemp and marijuana. And the hemp, as I understand it, doesn't have any. It's not like alcohol or marijuana. Doesn't have any psychological effects. And so I'm speaking more towards just promoting urban agriculture. And I think that from what I know, which is limited about hemp and marijuana, is that the hemp definitely falls more into the agricultural side of things versus tobacco, alcohol, etc.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, it's not like a psychoactive substance, you know. It's in that sense you can distinguish the two. But I mean, there's not a free market driving this because we're already regulating it through moratorium. Just, you know, and again, I'm not saying we need a pot shop, we need another pot shop. I'm not saying we need one on every corner. I'm not making a judgment about those things, but, you know, do you want to, you know, we have these businesses like grow operations and manufacturing facilities in Goldendale, but in the county, and it's like we're missing out on tax dollars and things like that potentially.
So
do we care? You know?
I think one of the things we need to look at is, yes, we are missing a lot of that. Whether we allow it in the city or it's just outside the city limits by 200 feet, I mean, that's basically what we're missing. From my understanding, there's pretty much a good number of growers around the county. So yeah, there is a whole morality issue, but I think since you brought it up, Justin, not me, I think one of the things we need to look at is, yes, we're differentiating between hemp and marijuana right now. We can sit around and say there's so many differences, but if somebody wants to bring in a business, a marijuana business in, they're going to do the opposite. They're going to say, well, you allow hemp, and they're very much alike. except for some very distinct chemical differences. So if you allow that one, why not this one? So I think looking ahead, one of my concerns would be, if there's already, you guys have seen the legal issues in the current ordinance, let's get those sorted out. The other thing is, in that ordinance, for the agriculture, regardless of what the product is being grown, I think location is important and appeal is important. Because having a shop that is right in the edge of town, that looks like a single wide that's barely holding up, is not very appealing. I mean, you can go to other places around the country and it looks like a business, a good business, and a strip mall, standalone, high-class businesses. So I think appeal has a lot to do with it. Location, definitely zoning. And we have a lot of lots open over here on industrial that is away from everybody else. Where if
I agree. I mean, that's what I'm thinking when I think about production.
If you want to bring a big open building and, do all these agriculture things that they're doing now, stacking things, hydro, whatever. Let's look at them now and have that open, just because we don't allow another pot shop here, doesn't mean that they can't grow and ship it somewhere else. I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm getting. I guess I should back up. The way the ordinance is written right now, it doesn't allow any type of business, right? No grow operation, no processing facility, the hemp, there's an ambiguity, that's kind of how broad came up, and no more retail. And so if you look at the shop that's in town by the highway, you're like, oh, that's a lousy building, it looks like crap. Why don't they move? Why don't they go into a nicer spot? Well, the answer is they're not allowed to under the zoning code, because they are a grandfathered in, non-conforming use. If they were to move or build an entirely new building for that matter, they would lose that grandfathered status and they would not allow to operate. And that's the way the code is written. So there's things we can do to the code, I come with different proposals that accommodate these different things. Hemp ag. And that is going to be easy to accommodate because they are licensed with the Department of Ag, whereas grow operations for cannabis, production facilities, and retail, they are licensed with the Liquor Control Board, Liquor Cannabis Control Board, whatever they call themselves. So, they're very different state-level agencies regulating them.
So would we be
so I don't think we're going to have that issue that someone says, oh, well, if you're allowing this, why don't you allow this, right? I think you can create the delineation from an ordinance standpoint very easily.
Would there be a way
I
to
guess I would
say,
suggest that we work on encouraging urban agriculture, and we let the federal and state government deal with hemp versus marijuana. That's just more than we even want to begin to take on. And then we don't just look at regulating specifically hemp, just like we're not going to regulate specifically alfalfa, but that we just take on agriculture. And if hemp is a state and federally legal ag operation, then that falls under that umbrella. Sure. That's just my 2 cents. So, and I'm also curious, Justin, with the current situation, what are the limitations or violations with the current code related to both water use, municipal water use, and then the zoning as well?
We go to the zoning board if you have a violation.
Is it in violation if someone has an agricultural operation of any sort?
No. So in this case, it's a commercial activity. You can have home use And if you're in a zone that doesn't allow ag as a principal use, and it allows it as a conditional use, you have to apply for a conditional use permit. So it's a public process. There's hearing, it goes before the zoning board. You kind of make your argument. Public gets to participate. And in some cases, ag is not allowed at all. I mean, most residential zoning districts don't allow for commercial ag even as a conditional use.
Within the city, yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah, within the city.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's something we can revisit. I mean, if you want to have a small commercial operation, it's kind of like we have the home office code. If you want to have a home business, there's certain things there's certain qualifications you need to meet, you know what I mean? And if it's ag, and there's a water use, I mean, for the most part, we welcome the usage, because you're gonna pay for it. But, obviously, if it gets to a point where the usage is a burden on the water system, then we're gonna have we have a process for that. But I mean, even at the brewery, I mean, some people thought we were gonna use all this water, and like, we use just as much water as the average single family home does. So, go figure. But anyway.
But like I say, this relates to my work with the State Conservation Commission and other entities, and I've actually pulled some information for some other folks. And so, if folks are willing, I wouldn't mind working with Justin on some potential code language to consider for Goldendale.
No, that sounds good.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, we'll work on some options here, and obviously this is a public process, and, people that have listened to Nancy's video are kind of remember this part the most, I'm sure. So sorry if you start hearing about it in the next couple of days, but just let everyone know we're in the planning stages, and we're welcoming the public input, as long as they're civil. We're not making unilateral decisions here. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure the community can grow, especially considering, everything that's happened in the last 6 to 8 months. We want to make sure, people are able to get by and we're able to grow the community and make sure our citizens are taken care of. So, anyway.
Justin, I think
I
this
appreciate your efforts, Justin. I think we've seen a lot of growth and folks coming in the community, both in the city and the county, and this has been a great update and information. I appreciate your presentation.
Justin, I think this is really a good opportunity, especially for this last item, because we need to get ahead of it before it comes here. Definitely a good opening for the entire community to share positive feedback so we can have a really good plan for when these businesses come, whether they want them here or not. The whole thing, the location, the appeal, everything like that, let's have that discussion now before it ends up in our lap. So
I agree. I mean, that's all these things, right? Like, whether it's the tax thing or the defense thing or the housing development, we don't want to be stuck where, opportunity passes us, good opportunity, I should say, passes us by,
right, or somebody builds some kind of shack and call it a housing development,
Oh, yeah.
We need to get ahead of it all first. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Anyway, no problem. So I guess I'll have my marching orders, as they say, and work on some stuff. Probably meet again in December. We're going to have, there's different, some of these things, maybe like the fences, the food trucks, I could see us kind of maybe trying to move into a draft ordinance phase a bit sooner. The hemp thing might need a little more research, and obviously some of the housing development comprehensive planning is going to kind of extend into next year, but, this is the way these things go. But I think that's kind of like how I would set everyone's expectation timeline on these things. But yeah, let's let's plan to meet again in December, like, you know, in 6 weeks or so, and we can, I'll give some updates and we can talk a bit more about, I have some maybe draft language on some of the things we can look at. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. 6 weeks, early December, there's some of these things that are moving quick, especially the housing needs, so that'd be great,
Yeah.
Justin.
Okay, cool, yeah. Early December is good, then everyone checks out at the end of the year. Not saying that's what I'm gonna do, but anyway, cool, so that's kind of all I got. I mean, does anyone else wanna talk about anything or have questions, anything like that?
All I'm gonna say is good job, Justin. We'll just keep at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
All right.
Okay, I think
All
with
right.
that, I think we'll end the meeting and adjourn it. So that finishes our discussion on the ordinance committee for tonight. And we'll look at getting back together in about 6 weeks. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.